Okay, well, before we move on, you have a third book in the works. You've been extremely productive, and the last one is in the I think the relatively final stages. So why don't you just tell us a bit about that book, its topic, and when we can expect it to hit the shelves?
Yeah, thank you. From when I wrote the first book on Derrida, I always had the ambition to do three: Derrida, Foucault, and the third one is Gilles Deleuze. And I see them as the three most important and influential thinkers that get sort of labeled as postmodern thinkers. Foucault himself said that the coming period, the century to come, will be Deleuzean. And I try to argue in the Deleuze book that is to a large extent what we've seen. And if Foucault and Derrida are very helpful for understanding where we've come from and how modernity has got to where it's got, then perhaps Deleuze is the thinker who most fully explains where we are and where we're going as a society. And so I think he's incredibly important and influential as a thinker. And I've also really both been challenged and energized by how to engage with his thought in particular from a reformed position. So I've had to almost reinvent my approach with each of these three books. In Derrida, I thought that the best way to engage his thought in a way that did justice both to his thought and the Bible was to go through the prologue to John's Gospel, which raises many of the same concerns that Derrida is dealing with. In terms of Foucault, again, it was a particular passage or two passages that I thought would really get to the heart of both what he's saying and provide a productive conversation, which is Philippians 2 and 1 Corinthians 1. But with Deleuze, I just quickly came to the conclusion that there's no single biblical passage or even single biblical book that will allow us to engage the whole of Deleuze's thought. And so I've taken a biblical theological approach in the Deleuze book, sweeping through from creation through fall, redemption, and consummation, and trying to show how what I'm calling an emplotted biblical approach will both allow us to engage with Deleuze's thought in its own terms, but also highlight really important points at which the biblical narrative differs from the way in which he is understanding the world. And along the way, I've discovered some new ways of, I guess, thinking biblically. So one example, discovered for me, I'm not suggesting that I'm the first person to think in this way, but they became part of my own theological vocabulary through studying Deleuze. One example would be the way in which Christianity is stubbornly historical. The claim is that the most important reality is not a reality that's disengaged from this world, but Christ became incarnate. God was, as John says in the opening verses of the first of his letters, we could touch and see and hear this Christ, this God. So there's if you like, a scandal of the material there, that ultimate reality was incarnate materially. There's a scandal of the historical, that Christ came on a particular calendar day in history. We're not talking about an abstract universal reality that's detached from the historical record, but the incarnation happened on a particular day, which is, for many modern ways of thinking, a really scandalous approach. I think Richard Dawkins is scandalized both by the materiality and the historicity of Christ. He sees it as very parochial. That God would come in a particular first century Jewish man rather than being a universal principle. And the third scandal is the temporal, in that human and world history is unrepeatable, and it has a meaning. In a Christian understanding of time, is that it's going somewhere, it's building towards an eschaton. And I think that is also uncomfortable for many modern readers. And so that I've been energized and challenged by the way in which engaging with Deleuze has forced me to think differently in terms of the way in which I engaged the Bible with his thought to the way that I became familiar with in terms of Derrida and Foucault.
That's great. So would it be fair to say that this third book is really for readers who want to know the future of postmodernism, or what the state of the art is? This is a newer generation of postmodern thinkers?
I think it's useful for two things. It's useful for understanding where we are now. A lot of the debates and positions that are taken in society, across society today, are powerfully explained by Deleuzean ideas. So I think if you want to understand where we are now, it's really important. But I think it does also, Deleuze does also indicate where society may be going. I mean, none of us knows for certain, of course, and I wouldn't, and I'm sure nor would he claim with any sort of definitiveness that the future will certainly be Deleuzean, but it shows indications of going in that direction. And therefore, if we understand his thought, we can, to some extent, have an educated guess as to where things are heading.